So you're going to get 14 questions out of the contracts chapter on the real estate exam. So y'all, that's a lot of questions. Obviously, they feel like contracts are important, and it is. Can you see where you can cause some people a lot of problems, both buyer and seller, if we don't understand contracts?
Oh, yeah.
How to draft them. Make sure you understand all the provisions within a contract. You got to know that stuff. You should never ask your client to sign something and you're not sure what they're agreeing to, right?
Right.
That's a problem. So anyway, 14 questions. So we're just going to go through them, through the information. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Love to help out that way. But we start out really just going over some terms like we do it in most modules. Just get these straight because we're going to be talking about these terms throughout the chapter. But the first you see is expressed. We can express things in really one of two different ways, either orally or in writing, right? And I will tell you, believe it or not, that's a question they like to ask on the exam. How can you express something, either orally or in writing? It can be done either way. Now, obviously, are there certain types of contracts you think might have to be in writing, where maybe some other types of contracts do not have to be in writing? And that's true also. And that's what we're going to be dealing with and talking about throughout this chapter, because we got to make sure we know which is which. Now, you'll notice it does say right off the bat, agency contracts have to be in writing. That's one of those that must be expressed in writing, agency agreements. And hopefully I remember talking about those in a previous chapter.
I'm sorry, are there slides that you're sharing?
Yes, there is. I am so sorry. I forgot to put them up there, but I'm looking at them. All right, can y'all see it now?
Yeah,
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it looks a lot, my bad. So hopefully we got that straight. So again, agency contracts must be in writing, but then you'll also see contracts of sale must also be expressed in writing. But what I want you to pay attention to here, at least with these two types of contracts, is what requires them to be in writing, because it's different things. And you'll notice it says the agency agreements or contracts must be in writing because of state law or state statute. And here's why this is a big deal. In South Carolina, remember, implied agency is illegal. Some states it's legal, meaning it could be expressed orally or verbally or whatever, but not in South Carolina because of state law. This is not a federal law. So state law requires agency to be established in writing. But then you'll notice where it says contracts of sale must be in writing, but that's due to what we call the statute of frauds. We're going to be talking about that some more in this chapter, the statute of frauds, that is. But for now, just know statute of frauds is a federal law. That's a national law. So basically, contracts of sale, if they're going to be enforceable, would have to be in writing. If they're not in writing, they're not enforceable. That's what statute of frauds means. But again, we're going to talk more about that as we go through the chapter. Implied contracts, which means they're oral or verbally agreed upon, or sometimes they're just established just merely by the acts of the parties. In fact, let me give you this example. What we're talking about, just to make sure we're clear here. Let's say this actually happened. So I just used this one. This was a few years ago, but I was actually coming home from work, and one of the neighbor's kids come up to me and asked me before I could get into the house. He asked me if he could cut my grass. Now, if anybody knows me, knows I like that idea, because I'm not cutting it. That's just not my thing. That is, as far as I can tell, that's a very unhealthy thing to do. I have never felt good after cutting grass, never. So for him to ask if he can cut it, I kind of like the idea, but I asked him, I said, how much? How much are you going to charge to cut my grass? And he said he would do it for $20. I said, really? You'll do the front and the back? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, go get your lawnmower, get it cutting. Y'all, and he did. Yeah, and he did every bit of good his job, or better than I'd have done. So I was obviously pleased with it. But a couple of weeks went by. I come home from work and I noticed my grass has been cut again. Now, I never discussed this with the neighbor's child. I just thought he just needed some spending money that particular day to keep his girlfriend happy or whatever. But anyway, yeah, he actually came. Actually, I hadn't been inside long. He knocked on my door and said, Mr. Griffin, I cut your grass again today. And I said, I see that. And I just gave him another $20. Y'all, and for whatever reason, y'all, he just keeps cutting. Y'all, he'd cut it and I'd pay him. He'd cut it and I'd pay him. And that's been going on now for 2 or 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Well, I say, y'all, he actually last summer, towards the end, he actually came up and said he was going to have to go up on the price. I said, really? How much?
Inflation.
And he said I'm going to have to go up to about $30. And I said, why? Why are you going up to 30? And he said, well, cost of gas and yada, yada, yada. I said, so you're telling me it's going to cost you another $10 in gas just to cut my grass? Really? But anyway, my wife told me to hush and just give him the money. So that's what I did. I gave him the money. But here's the point I'm trying to make. Y'all, let's say he cut my grass today and he comes to collect the money. And I say, you know what? I didn't tell you to cut my grass today. And quite frankly, I didn't tell you to cut my grass the second time. But I certainly didn't ask you to cut it today. And I'm not paying you today. And quite frankly, I'm not paying you anymore either. Now, y'all, if I refuse to pay him under these circumstances, now, obviously he can sue me. Y'all, I get that. Y'all, anybody can sue anybody else for any reason. I get it. But my question is, what are the chances under these circumstances that he would actually win his case in a courtroom?
He wouldn't.
Being that you paid him?
No, he was suing because I'm saying I'm not paying him. I'm not paying him.
Oh, okay.
And now he's suing me for the pay.
So this is the second time or the third?
No, we've been doing this a couple of years probably now, but
because I'm thinking because you paid him the first 2 times and he just, I don't know. It was like this is saying it when he implied that y'all had a contract.
But in South Carolina, it has to be written to be enforceable.
Yeah, everything is written in South Carolina.
all right, y'all see, now this is what I want you to think about. Now, remember, I did say there are some contracts that must be in writing. And I did say agency contracts, agency agreements. Y'all, that means if you're going to be listing the house for sale, a listing agreement or a buyer's agreement for representing the seller, that has to be in writing in South Carolina. But that's not what we're talking about right here.
So there you go. So if it's an intent and you paid me once, twice, then I'm implying that we had a contract because of my actions. I keep doing, you keep paying me. So
that's exactly right.
I think you have a good chance.
So yeah, he would easily win. In fact, judge might try to put me in jail for not paying this child. But y'all, yeah, because of the acts of the part, y'all, he cut it, I'd pay him. He'd cut it, I'd pay him. Y'all, there's no reason for him not to think if he cut it today, I shouldn't pay him today. That's an implied contract. Y'all, that's where it's been established by the acts of the parties. Y'all, that's what an implied contract is. Okay. Now, bilateral contracts. Well, y'all, how many is bi?
2.
2. Very good. So anytime you have a bilateral contract, that means there are 2 parties promising to do something. Like in real estate, you got one party promising to sell, the other party promises to buy. That's a bilateral contract. You know, that's all they're talking about there. But then you could have a unilateral contract. Now, how many is uni?
One.
One. So obviously, if you have a unilateral contract, then that means there's only one party that's bound to the contract. And y'all, there are several different examples of this, but I'll tell you the most common that we'll be dealing with, at least in real estate, would be the option to buy. An option to buy is considered a unilateral contract. It is binding on the seller. It is not binding on the buyer. Now, if you're not familiar or understand right now what an option to buy is, don't worry about it. We got that's coming up a little bit later in the chapter. We're going to discuss it and make sure you understand it. But for now, I just want you to know there's a difference between a bilateral contract and a unilateral contract. Okay, that's all I care about you really understanding for right now. Then you see where it talks about executed contracts. Y'all, executed just means that, y'all, it's been fully executed. In real estate, the best example would be, y'all, the house has closed. We've closed. The buyer did what they agreed to do. The seller did what they agreed to do. Everybody's happy. So the contract now is considered fully executed. But then you'll see right below it, you see the term executory contract. Now, y'all be careful that you don't confuse these two. Y'all make sure you're on mute. Okay. All right. So anyway, don't confuse executory with executed. Executory means we have a contract, but not all the obligations have been fulfilled yet. Okay. Everybody get that? For example, the house might be under contract, but we have not closed. So it's considered executory. Once it closes, everybody's done what they're supposed to do, then it becomes executed. Okay. All right. The next term is void. Void contracts. I got to. I'm not sure how to even explain void any better than just void. Y'all, if something's void, according to contract law, then it's as if it never even existed. So obviously, there's no legal effect, no consequence as a result of whatever you had. Because if the contract's void, then for all intents and purposes, the contract never, ever even existed. That's what void means. But again, be careful that you don't confuse void with voidable. Two different situations here. And I will tell you, this is the one that a lot of people have get in trouble with come test time. Voidable means that the contract can be voided by one of the parties. Does not mean it's void. It just means it can be voided by one of the parties. And y'all, and an example that might be, say the seller's got his house on the market and he's asking $150,000 for the house. Well, I'm the buyer and I submit him an offer and I offer him $140,000. Well, seller says, no, I'm not selling for 140. So he counters back and says, I'll sell it for 145. Right? Now, do you think that's common in real estate? For a buyer to make an offer and the seller counter back with something else? In fact, probably more times than not, very common. But see, you got to understand what happens when you make that counter offer, no matter who it is making the counter. Because now when that buyer receives the counter offer, I now have three options. I got three options that I could take and I got to choose one of them. Obviously, I could just accept the counter and say, all right, fine, I'll buy it at 145. Or I could counter the counter and basically says, no, I'll pay 142, right? Or my last option is I could just reject it outright and say, no, forget it. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Well, y'all, if I reject the offer or the counter offer, then that voids whatever contract was initially in place, right? But the time that I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do, which one of these options am I going to take, is considered voidable, because it is voidable by me. If I choose to just reject it, then that would void the contract. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Very good. All right. So y'all be careful. Y'all don't confuse these two. I'm telling you, this is going to get you on the exam if you're not careful. The next terms we look at are enforceable and unenforceable. And quite frankly, and then right below it, I think you'll see the term valid and invalid. All of these terms kind of go together. And here's why. You know, when we talk about an enforceable contract, we're talking about a contract that can be enforced in a court of law. So if you go to court suing the other party to do or not do something, would this be enforceable in court? That's the question we're asking. Or would it be unenforceable? And I will tell you, the simple answer is, if the contract is valid, then it would be enforceable in court. However, if we determine the contract is invalid, then the contract is not enforceable in a courtroom. So again, to be enforceable, at least we're talking about contracts of sale right now. Yeah, obviously we know it has to be in writing. We talked about that earlier, and it has to be in writing due to the statute of frauds to make it enforceable. Unenforceable means, or one way to make it invalid is to not have it in writing, just got an oral agreement. That's not going to be enforceable. But if I go ahead and skip to the next slide real quick, where it's talking about the valid and invalid, y'all, to have a valid contract so that we know it's enforceable, it must contain all the essential elements of a valid contract. Y'all, I will tell you there are 4 essential elements, and we're going to talk about what those are here in a little bit. So don't worry about it right this second. But as long as all the essential elements are present and agreed upon in the contract, in writing, then it's a valid contract, whereby it's now enforceable in court. But if any of these essential elements are missing or lacking, then it's considered invalid and obviously would not be enforceable in court. I hope that makes sense to everybody. All right. And then you see the term contract reformation. Reformation is the term I want you to pay attention to. But and I will tell you, this is something you will be dealing with routinely in real estate. Say for example, you've got, the contract of sale is already pre-printed. Okay. The one that we use here locally, some contracts may vary from area to area, but the contract of sale that we tend to use here locally is 8 pages long. Well, the good news is you don't have to write up an 8-page contract every time you try to sell a house. They're already pre-printed, right? It's just blanks you got to fill in. Just fill in the blanks. That's all there is to it. Is it possible that in one area of this pre-printed contract, it already states one thing, that's pre-printed in the contract, and then you see where somebody, either one of the buyer, seller, one of the agents, whatever, goes in the contract and hand writes something in the contract that completely contradicts something already pre-printed somewhere else in the contract. Do you think that might happen much? I'm telling you, it's very common, where you'll see where it'll say one thing already in the contract and then somebody wrote something else in the contract that contradicts each other. So now in a situation like that, then which provision do you go with? Do you go with the one that was already pre-printed in the contract, or do you go the one that was handwritten by somebody? That's where reformation comes into play. Contract reformation. Reformation says anything handwritten carries more weight than something that was already there pre-printed. I remember that. Anything handwritten carries more weight than what was pre-printed in the contract. I will also tell you, according to Reformation, letters carry more weight than numbers. Now, why is that important? Well, I'll give you this example. I don't know how many of you still write checks anymore. I know that's not a very common thing for most people nowadays, but y'all still know how to write a check? Y'all still write checks from time to time? Okay. Well, let's say I'm buying something from Walmart and I'm buying for $50. So I'm writing a check, and you got to write in the say $50, and then on the line below it, you got to spell it out. You got to write out the $50, right? Well, say for example, I put $50 in the blank, but then where I went to go write it out, for some reason I put $5. Well, we got a contradiction here. One area in the check says $50, one area says $5. Well, which one we're going with? Hopefully you said $5, right? Because anytime you have a contradiction like that, letters carry more weight than numbers. So whatever you spelled out, that's gonna be what you're going with if there's a difference between the two. Everybody good there?
Yep.
So anything handwritten carries more weight than pre-printed. Letters carry more weight than numbers. All right. Now we get into these essential elements. In fact, remember I told you there were 4 essential elements to have a valid contract. What do you think the chances are they would ask you on the exam, what are the essential elements of a valid contract? Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Or they may just say which of the following is, or maybe which of the following would not be an essential element. So therefore, so you got to know what the essential elements are. So we'll go through them real quick. Number 1 says we must have an offer and an acceptance. Got to have it. How can you claim to have a contract if 1, no one ever made an offer, and 2, it was never accepted? That kind of makes sense. So got to start there. Got to have an offer and an acceptance. Then secondly, it says there must be some legal consideration. Now we need to talk about this one a little bit, because there's really 2 different forms of consideration that could be acceptable or would be acceptable as an essential element. You could have what we call valuable consideration. You could also have invaluable consideration, but one or the other has to be present. Valuable consideration would be the price paid. So, if I offer $150,000 to this seller, then that's my valuable consideration, $150,000. Okay. Or maybe I just offered him $5. Okay. The law does not say how much the consideration has to be. There just has to be some valuable consideration with your offer for it to be valid. Okay. Now, so could I decide to give my house to somebody without any monies passing hands? I could.
Yeah.
But if there's not going, obviously, if no money passes hands, that means there's no valuable consideration. Therefore, there would have to be some invaluable consideration, and the law only recognizes one form of invaluable consideration. Hopefully you see that in your material book there, but that would be love and affection. So either there got to be some money passing hands that's been agreed upon. That would be the valuable consideration. Or if there's no money agreed upon, then the contract must state for love and affection. So would you rather pay love and affection, or would you rather pay however much money they want? That's the question. I guess you got to ask yourself. Y'all, does that make sense? Y'all okay with that? Everybody good? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all, then the third essential element says we must have competent parties. Now, this is where things can start getting very interesting very quickly. Competent parties. Y'all been doing real estate for a long time. And I think a lot of the transaction I've dealt with or been involved with, I think there would be some argument as to the competency of some of these characters, to say the least. But what does the law say a competent party would include? Well, it says they have to be of legal age. Y'all, what's the legal age here? 18, right? So you'd have to be at least 18 years of age. Y'all, legally, anyone under the age of 18 is considered incompetent, right? That's the law. Insane persons are considered incompetent. Yep, they were a good portion of my clients, seems like. And y'all, what does the last one say? Y'all see it? What is it?
Legal purpose.
Legal purpose.
Well, no, of the competent parties.
Oh, competent.
Okay, but in your book, y'all, I want you to see it. That's why I'm bringing this to your attention.
Intoxicated.
Intoxicated. So actually in the book, it identifies what incompetent parties would include. And again, number one was anyone under the age of 18, anyone that would be considered insane. And then thirdly, intoxicated. Now, is that just beer or liquor or let's say, is that just alcohol, or could that include drugs of some sort?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're not sober, then you are considered incompetent, at least during the time that you're not sober. So here's what I want to make sure you get. In fact, let's look at an example, because y'all, they may give you a scenario like this or similar to it on the exams. I want to be sure we're clear on this. Y'all, say you got two parties want to get together and negotiate a deal, buying and selling of whatever. Where does it seem like a lot of people like to go meet when they want to negotiate a deal? Where do we want to meet?
Restaurant.
Bar,
Let's go to the bar. Let's go drink. Let's go have a beer and talk about it. Let's go work this thing out. Yep, there you go. Both of you get incompetent while we work out the deals to this contract. Well, let's just say we in fact go to the bar, or these two parties go to the bar. They do agree on the terms to buy and sell whatever it is they're selling. And they both get wasted. Both of them, they're just wasted. Y'all, when I said, just to be clear, y'all, they have to call Uber to take them home. They can't even drive home now. Under those circumstances, can that buyer and seller go to closing and close on this deal?
No.
Y'all, that was kind of a trick question, and I didn't mean for it to be, but I have to make this point here. Y'all, the answer is they can. Y'all, because see, here's what I want to make sure you're grasping, and don't over grasp here. Y'all, if one of the parties is incompetent, drunk, for example, y'all, that does not mean it's illegal. Y'all, is it illegal to negotiate the terms of a deal while you're drinking a beer? Is that illegal?
No.
No, otherwise half this country or more will be in jail right now. No, it's not illegal. What it does mean is it's not enforceable, because if one or both of the parties are drunk, then that means we are missing or lacking one of the essential elements to the contract, right? We do not have competent parties. So if the contract's not valid, that does not mean the contract is illegal. It just means it's no longer enforceable. Remember, we talked about enforceable and unenforceable. So in other words, as long as both parties agree to show up to closing and do what they agreed to do, all is well. No problems. But let's say the buyer decides or wakes up the next day and says, you know what, I know I signed that contract, but I was wasted when I did that, and I'm not doing it. There's no way I'm buying that property under these conditions or circumstances. Well, is there anything the seller can do about it if the buyer just says, I'm not buying? Nothing.
Nope.
Because you do not have an enforceable contract, because the contract you have is invalid. And if it's invalid, that makes it unenforceable. So again, y'all be careful. Don't just assume because a contract might be invalid that makes it illegal and now you can't do it. That is not the case. That is not the case. Any questions there? Everybody understand that? Good? We're good? All right. Now, the fourth essential element says there has to be legal purpose in order for the contract to be valid. So obviously, whatever you're agreeing to do or not do has to be legal. If you cut a deal with a what do you call it? The drug person that sells drugs. Well, I don't even know if there's a name for it or not.
Drug dealer.
A drug dealer. There you go.
Pharmaceutical distributor.
Yeah, there you go. You cut a deal with this drug dealer. I'm going to give you $20,000 for however much cocaine. And the buyer gives him the money, but he never gets the cocaine. What you going to do about it?
Nothing.
Do you see anything good coming out of it if you try to take him to court and sue him for it?
No.
No, I don't see anything good happening there. Again, it has to be it has to be legal. So if you agree to do something that's not legal, there's absolutely no chance it's valid or enforceable. Not going to happen. All right. Any questions about what these essential elements are? Everybody good there? Everybody happy? All right. Then the next thing we got to take a look at, it says the contract has to be legal form. In other words, we're talking about in right. Remember we said some contracts, in order for it to be enforceable, would have to be in writing. Now, not all contracts have to be in writing. Some do, some don't. But I will tell you, contracts that are subject to the statute of frauds, and we're getting ready to talk about that statute here in just a second. But any type of contract that is subject to the statute of frauds, it must be in writing if you expect it to be enforceable in court. Now, again, that doesn't mean if you don't put, for example, buying a house, real estate, I will just go ahead and tell you, I'm going to give you a little heads up. Real estate would be subject to the statute of frauds. So contracts of sale must be in writing if it's going to be enforceable. But say I'm talking to a seller and we orally or verbally agreed to buy the house and sell the house. And assuming we never put anything in writing, can we still show up to closing and close with nothing in writing? We can, as long as all parties show up and do what they agree to do. Again, where the problem is, if one party says, I'm not doing it, I've decided I don't want the house anymore. Well, if it was never in writing, is there anything the other party can do to try to enforce it? No, right? Because it was a type of contract that was subject to the statute of frauds, meaning it has to be in writing. So actually, you know what, before we go, yeah, we're going to talk about the statute of frauds some more here in just a little bit, but I'm kind of tempted to go, but no, we're not going to talk about statute. We're going to talk about it here coming up here in just a little bit.